Hi and welcome back to the Stockholm School of Economics and Handelsdagarna's late night talk show. We are joined here in the studio by Jan-Olof Jacke, Director General at the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, also known as Svenskt Nringsliv in Swedish. Jan-Olof, nice to have you here with us tonight. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very good. I'm glad to have you here tonight. I thought we were going to start off this interview with speaking a little bit about what Svenskt Nringsliv actually is. Svenskt Nringsliv is something that you often read and hear about in different business contexts, but can you explain what Svenskt Nringsliv actually are doing?
Yeah, so we are Sweden's largest business federation. We have 50 member organizations and around 60,000 member companies employing around 2 million people, primarily in the private sector, but not only in the private sector. And what we do is to basically do two things. We spend most of our time trying to impact the public and the politicians to really try to get as good conditions for companies in Sweden, regardless of Swedish or international companies, as it's possible. So driving the competitiveness of Sweden is a prime objective. And the second one is that we coordinate all activities on the labor market with counterparts on the union side.
Okay, so it sounds like a quite broad role then. You do quite a lot, I understand, related to business in Sweden and also on a global point of view. But Director General, it sounds like a quite an impressive title. What are your main focus?
Well, basically it's the same thing as being the CEO of the organization. Well, my main focus over the last year has obviously been very strongly on the COVID crisis. But in general, I have a couple of areas where I'm particularly interested. Entrepreneurship. I am very interested in innovation and education, and those are the ones that I primarily personally get engaged with. But my organization gets engaged in questions over a very broad range of topics, anything from taxes to to climate change questions, to education at all levels, to labor market specific questions. It's a quite broad range of questions. Basically, anything that can improve the competitiveness of Sweden and the possibility to drive successful companies out of this country.
Yeah, well, I can definitely imagine that it has been a pretty hectic and busy year 2020, especially for Svenskt Nringsliv, not least given the pandemic. And since it feels like you have a pretty good overview of the business climate in Sweden, can you see any difference in how the pandemic has affected large SMEs, small and medium-sized companies, or is it mainly about the industry the companies are operating in?
I think it's both. I think many large companies were quicker in setting up new value chains when they were disturbed in the spring, setting up the principle for how to work and to be able to run their business despite the difficult situation. So I think there have been some differences between small and large. There's also been some differences between small and large when they have had big issues on their top line and the ability to actually access all of the crisis packages from the government. Many of these very small companies have found that quite cumbersome and difficult. But primarily, I think the difference has been between which sector you are in. It's been interesting, though, and very difficult to explain what is the current climate of Swedish business, because it's been incredibly polarized. Some have sort of the time of their life, and then you have some who have basically lost all of their existing business. If you are in the hospitality sector, some parts of the transportation sector, incredibly difficult times still, and also in some part of dagligvaruhandel. What is that in English? Well, grocery stores, etc. Yeah. Also with big differences. If you're close to the borders, you have had no business, whereas many of the groceries have been having an excellent year 2020. So huge differences between different business sectors. I think is a more pronounced difference than SME versus large.
Great answer. And yeah, so for example, if you are a restaurant and you are affected heavily of this pandemic, what do you do from Svenskt Nringsliv side?
We were very focused. I mean, it's been challenging times for all of us, and primarily, of course, because of the health and life and death question. But we've been focused since basically day one, which is now almost a year ago, on putting heavy actions in place to support companies to survive, but also to avoid significant job losses and a mass unemployment. In Sweden in particular, we are quite slow in coming back from unemployment, and therefore it's been critical to save the companies so that there are workplaces to come back to when we are through the crisis. And the fact is that unemployment has gone up quite significantly, around 100,000 more unemployed now than a year ago. But at the same time, the number of bankruptcies are unchanged. So the same number of bankruptcies 2020 as it was 2019. So it's very clear that the economic measures put in place they have really helped, and they have supported both companies and the existence of jobs.
Okay. Yep. Quite a complex question, I understand. A little bit more about you, Jan-Olof. I know that you chose to study at the Gothenburg School of Economics and not the Stockholm School of Economics. Interesting choice, I must say.
Maybe I wasn't accepted, you know?
No, sorry, no, just kidding. Does it have to do with the fact that you are from Kungsbacka, or what made you start wanting to study in Gothenburg?
No, it was probably more practical reasoning behind it. I started to study very late in life. We ran a small family company which we sold, not because we made an awful lot of money on it, but rather the opposite. It didn't go very well. It was a company that was around 110 years old, so it had a long history. But it was not until I was 27 I started to study, and at that time we were quite established in Gothenburg. And my wife had a job there, and it was very natural for us or for me to join the Gothenburg School of Economics.
Yeah, that's a great school as well. Gothenburg, really good city. So, and I understand it was practical with the business as well. I wanted to know a little bit more about leadership, because you have worked at AstraZeneca for many years, and you turned out to be CEO there as well. And before that, you worked as a consultant. So today, many people actually consider you one of Sweden's most successful and experienced business leaders. And among us tonight, we probably have some of the business leaders of the future. So would you say some of the greatest challenges of being a leader for a big organization or company?
Well, I guess there are very many challenges, but I think you have to start with yourself, and the challenges will be different depending on who you are, what your style is. For me, it's been critical to stay close to who I am and the values I have. Then, of course, in a large organization, when I was the CEO of AstraZeneca in Sweden, it wasn't the whole AstraZeneca, it was the Swedish part, but it was still around sort of 7,000 employees. Clearly, the biggest challenge is to make everyone feel a part of the journey, and setting out the very clear goals and objectives, and bringing people along. You know, if I think about the things I'm strong at and the things I'm bad at, the things I'm strong at is probably primarily to get the best out of others. It's not being the smartest myself or the most knowledgeable in any specific area, but it's probably around putting the best team together, putting people around you that are very different from yourself, people who are better in their topics than you are yourself, and you know, strong individuals with a lot of drive. And then the biggest challenge, I think, is when you put very, very strong performers together in a team, you know, to make them a team. That is sometimes a challenge, which, you know, I think it's worth taking that challenge, because the results, if you bring it together, is terrific. But it's definitely a challenge if you're courageous enough to choose very, very ambitious people around you. You should always have people who can take your job, or that you will be able or willing to report to a few years from now. But when you do that, you of course bring on the challenge of making a team of strong individualists.
So focusing on yourself, but also on which people you surround yourself with, and make the most out of them.
To me, it's been the most critical success factor is probably being incredibly selective when you choose the people around you.
Yeah, great advice. I can imagine that, yeah, sure, you should focus on yourself, and you should focus on the people around you. And as a leader, you naturally do mistakes sometimes. So I would like to challenge you and ask if you have any favorite failure of yours, something that you have learned something about, or that has, in the long run, resulted in something good.
Yeah, well, the failures are too many to be repeated, but I guess the number one is to not make your failures too many times, the same failure. But if I choose one just from the top of my head, it's probably I moved to the UK for a few years, and I led a relatively large team there. And what I realized was that trying to bring different cultures together is quite a delicate topic. So the way I was used to manage in Sweden worked in parts quite well, but in parts didn't work at all. For instance, the way you give feedback, whether you do that in a one-to-one or whether you do it in front of everyone, quite a cultural difference. And what I learned from that was it's hard to sort of take parts out of the brick wall. You have to accept there is a different culture, try to still remain who you are and the values I have, but really respect the different cultures. One style is not necessarily successful in another country just because it's successful in your home country. And I certainly made quite numerous mistakes in the beginning when leading in the UK, and the expectation on me as a leader was quite different. I was used to be the one who was better on getting the best out of others rather than having the answers myself. The expectation there was very much more on me having the answers and bringing the clarity to topics. And to juggle that took quite some time to find a way through it.
Yeah. Interesting.
So you have Jan-Olof here as well. He probably knows more about that than most people.
Yeah, he's been around the world quite a lot and worked a lot of internationally. A final question, Jan-Olof. Do you have any piece of advice to the students watching today, career-wise? What type of environment should they look for? What should they do in order to be successful?
Well, if I just look to the environment, I would personally look for a fast-moving place, a place where diversity is appreciated and where speaking up is encouraged. I love personally to be among ambitious people, but ambitious people who want results, not just because they want to look after their own career, but really wanting to achieve something together. Sort of a piece of advice, I guess, is it's to do your own thing and don't look too much at others and what is expected. Do your own thing, and of course your results in school are not unimportant; they are critically important. But just as important is building a network, staying in touch, keeping the contacts. They would stay for you just as long as your most recent textbook. So I would really advise you to not only build your networks, but to look after them when you leave school. They are a great asset as you move forward.
Lovely. And with those words, we will round off this interview. Thank you very much, and thank you for some really great tips, Jan-Olof. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Take care.